Hello.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Okay, welcome everybody. Going to start with the 2-minute counter, 2-minute timer. Then we'll get started once that's up. It's taking a second to give it to me. Here we go. Okay, there's our 2-minute timer. We will get started once that is ready.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, hello.
And hello, everybody else.
Good evening.
We got about 90 seconds. We'll get started then. Just a heads up, I think some people might have their mics on. I don't know if you want them on or not. We're not saying anything. I don't know if you can hear that, Nachshon, but haven't really started yet. We're just kind of got the timer going. So we'll get started in about 30 seconds. Okay. All right. There is our timer. So we are ready to go. All right. So for those of you who have been with us for a while, we have been spending a long time on the 7th chapter of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, because it's a very, very long chapter. As I've said before, I believe it's the longest chapter in the book. A lot of information, a lot of things it's been doing. But today we should be finally finishing the chapter. So that is the plan for today. Before I continue, let me place our link in the chat. So that's now there in the chat in case anybody would like to recap, or if you missed anything, please feel free to check out at portlandcola.org, where you can find all of our previous classes. So to recap where we are at the end of the 7th chapter, and let's put it this way. About halfway through the book, after the 6th chapter, King Solomon goes ahead and puts a break. There's a clear, noticeable break in the text. If you were to look at the version of the book as it's written in a scroll version, which is pretty uncommon, but if you were to look at that, there would be a noticeable break at the end of the 6th chapter, which seems to indicate that it's a new topic going on. So whereas the first 6 chapters were discussing happiness and the path a person could take to achieve happiness from the material in this world, chapter 7 started something new. And it's taken us a while to kind of identify what it is that chapter 7 is doing, or what's happening in the second half of the book. And what we found was that it's really a discussion of wisdom as a whole. So whereas the first half of the book has been talking about happiness, now you're going to talk about wisdom, which makes sense. This is the book of the wisest of all people, according to the Torah, the wisest of all people who ever lived. And now he's discussing the search for wisdom. Okay, again, as opposed to the search for happiness, which was the first half of the book, this is the search for wisdom. And basically, this entire 7th chapter we've kind of understood to be an intro, a very long introduction, where he discusses what it means to search for wisdom. What is it? What are the steps a person has to take when searching for wisdom? And basically, the issue that he kept on bumping into was that there's so much information, so much wisdom that is not objective, it's subjective. So what one person understands to be wise, another person will not. Or whatever and what the wisdom that I'm looking for right now is not the wisdom that you can necessarily offer to me. So the issue that we run into is that, and this is the way he puts it, is there's no one specific, one surefire source of wisdom. In the entire world, you're not going to find one place where all the wisdom is presented in front of you. It can be true in certain instances. As he says, the acts of God, which we interpreted in 2 different ways. Either that means the Torah itself, the manual that God gives us to understand the world, that's pure wisdom. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Another way we looked at that was also to say that the certain objective truths can be defined and clear as wisdom, as knowledge. So science, mathematics, those are the acts of God. Those unchangeable subjects, basically, those unchangeable things, those are things that you could find objective truth in. When it comes to everything else, dealing with other people or defining what is considered truth or anything like that, we're going to run into an issue with the fact that everyone's going to perceive it a little differently. So King Solomon says, I wanted to become that source of wisdom for the rest of the world, but I found that even that's difficult for me to do. Even that's a difficult thing for me to do, to accomplish, because again, there's no such thing as a pure objective source of truth on subjective matters. If that makes sense. So, okay. And that's been a long time getting to that point. And he's identified a number of factors there also. The main one being that people are imperfect. So if people are imperfect, then the information, the wisdom that they give you are going to be imperfect. People are biased. People are interested in promoting themselves and their interests. So it's going to skew the way that they perceive wisdom and the way that they project wisdom also. So these are all issues that he's run into. So now with that, let us go into the screen share. And we could take a look at the most recent verses and this week's verses. So give me 1 second here to set up my screen on my side. Okay. Okay. All right, so we are here. This is again chapter 7. And he gave us a very interesting parable last week, in which he said that he compared something to an unfaithful wife. Okay, as I said last week, again, you could look up the video. I don't think it's not a misogynistic statement that he's trying to say. What he's just giving it from his perspective as a man. He perceives a certain type of wisdom to be similar to a unfaithful wife. And what is that type of wisdom? He talks about heresy. So when it comes to heresy, when a person acts as a heretic or speaks as a heretic, that is something that looks like wisdom, but it's really not. In the same way that an unfaithful spouse, an unfaithful partner, is somewhere where you should be able to place your trust. You should be able to come home to at the end of the day. But if somebody is unfaithful, so they take that away from you. They take away from you that sense of being settled. So in the same way, there's lots of types of wisdom out there, but there's one wisdom that looks like wisdom, but it's really not, or one type of pursuit that looks like wisdom, but it's really not wisdom, and that is heresy. So he's just kind of finishing up that thought over here with verse number 28. Again, the comparison to a woman is to the woman, the so to speak woman mentioned previously, which is a reference to heresy. Okay, I don't want to get into it too much because it was last week's discussion. So, and so let's take a look over here at verse number 28. And he says, Asher, because. So we have to look at the verse before. The verse before, I'm sorry, he said that he's saying, all right, now I'm going to present to you what I found as wisdom. Okay. And he says, just before I say that, let me get this off my chest, which is Asher od biksha nafshi. That there is the fact, or because my soul has searched out, velo matzati, and I did not find anything. Adam echad me'elef matzati, one person out of 1,000 I did find. Ve'isha b'chol eila lo matzati, but a woman amongst all these I did not find. Okay, let me repeat that. And he says, "Oh, asher od biksha nafshi," because my soul or myself, my person has searched out further. V'lo matzati, and I have not found anything. Adam echad me'elef matzati, one person out of 1,000 I have found. Ve'isha v'chol eila lo matzati, but a woman out of all this I have not found. Okay, so there's clearly a lack of context in this verse if we were to just read it as it is. But what he seems to be saying, again, continuing the same parable, the same allegory, is he's saying that I've searched out wisdom and I find it very difficult to find, right? There are little hints of it here and there. One person out of 1,000 perhaps can offer me something that I perceive as wisdom. But in all that, this woman that we've spoken about, I have not found any wisdom in her. I have not found any wisdom in that. And again, that is that idea of heresy, of thoughts and ideas that take a person away from their goals in life. Okay, let's put it that way. From a religious perspective, heresy would be philosophies or thoughts that take a person away from God. But in the same way, it could be heresy could be something that takes a person away from what they deem to be their true goals in life, and certain philosophies will take a person away from that. If a person's seeking happiness, for example, so going on certain pursuits for happiness, as we've already discussed, will be taking them in the wrong direction. So that we can look at that potentially as heresy also. Again, I don't want to get too stuck in the mud on heresy itself because it was a previous discussion. So he says, I find it interesting over here that he actually uses 3 terms, and they seem to contradict each other. He says, I looked and I did not find. And he says, 1 out of 1,000 I did find, but a woman amongst all these I did not find. So when we have that, we would have to say that third section over there is really the bulk, or the main point of the verse over here, meaning that almost you could take this middle part out and put in the parentheses. As I looked and I did not find a woman amongst all those that I looked for, I did not find any sort of meaning, and a woman again in this case is heresy. I did not find heresy to be a fitting source of wisdom, as opposed to when I look amongst other wisdoms, which are true wisdom, even amongst those, I found only 1 out of 1,000. Okay,
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
It seems contrived to me that we're translating Isha as heresy. And it's confusing to me that these statements are coming from the same guy who wrote Eshet Chayil that we sing every Friday, where clearly he has a great deal of respect and honor for women.
Right.
And just taking it, the meaning of the word Isha, we all know what that means. So it seems as though rabbis are trying to figure out a way to make this work without, without confronting this contradiction between these verses and the verses in Eshet Chayil, for example.
Right. Yeah, I will definitely grant you that. This is an extrapolation that I am taking, not just me, as you said, it is actually pretty common amongst the commentaries to take this extrapolation. The issue that we discussed this a little bit last week is the issue that you run into is, as you pointed out, King Solomon did not just write the book of Kohelet. King Solomon also wrote the book of Mishlei, of Proverbs, and there he writes the exact opposite. There is the very end of the book, Eshet Chayil, like you mentioned. We also mentioned last week that there's another phrase, there's another verse over there where he says, Matzah Isha, Matzah Tov, that if a person finds a woman, he found good. I'll tell you this much. And it's actually kind of one of the things I was getting to is there's a surface level understanding of verse 2. You could just read it as saying, I have not found a woman who can help me in my pursuit of wisdom. And in fact, the sages do say that. They say, interesting that he points out the number 1,000 because he had 1,000 wives. According to our tradition, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So that comes out altogether to 1,000 wives, or women who were in his harem. And with that understanding, you say, okay, well, look, he's telling us something else over here. He's saying that he never found a woman who can help him achieve his goals, achieve wisdom. He had to do it all himself, I guess, is what he would have to look at it as. And that's a mistake on his own side. There is no question, I guess you could say there is some question, but in Torah literature, you will find that King Solomon is held accountable for the mistakes he made, particularly the mistakes that were caused by his way too many wives. There's a commandment in the Torah. One of the rules that a king is held to is that a king is not allowed to have too many wives. We understand the number is to be 18 for some reason. There's a way we get to that conclusion. And again, we say that King Solomon had 1,000. Well, that's too many, simply put. And all of his struggles that he had in life came through the fact that he married too many women. He married all these people, or had some relationship with all these people. What's interesting is you bring up Eshet Chayil, which is, if you look through the verses over there, Eshet Chayil is the end of the last chapter. It's the last 22 verses of the last chapter of Proverbs. 22, 11, I don't remember what it is. It's either one or the other. And it's actually a parable told to him by his mother, Bathsheba, who was the wife of David. And she tells him, if you actually look at the words, it says, Eshet Chayil mi yimtza, who can find a woman who gives this support. Chayil is a poetic term of support or power. So meaning it's a very difficult thing to do. And we understand, tradition tells us that it was a reprimand from his mother for doing what he did of marrying all these women and leading him astray to some degree or another. So there is definitely a surface level over here where we say that King Solomon's lamenting the fact that whereas having the right life partner, again, whether it's a woman to a man to a woman, it doesn't matter. Having the right life partner should be something that leads a person towards a greater levels of wisdom, should be something that leads a person to achieving goals in their life. He never found that. Unfortunately, he's not telling us why necessarily. I guess we would have to look more into that to see why. We'd have to see where he made his mistakes. And that would be a whole nother study. But yeah, there's definitely, as Jacob, as you're saying, there's definitely a surface level understanding here where you could render the verses as saying a very specific life lesson that he picked up. That I guess kind of like that unfaithful wife or spouse we talked about before, that a convention that should be there to support a person and hopefully that help them reach higher levels, he found to not be helpful. I hope that helps. But you're right, it's definitely a stretch. That's why I kind of went with, we're talking about wisdom, so let's discuss a philosophy that's unhelpful. But I think you're right. I know you're right. There's definitely something over here that's personal to King Solomon himself.
I didn't realize that Bathsheba was the author of Eshet Chayil. I thought those were King Solomon's words.
I have to look up just to make sure, but it is King Solomon's words, but I believe that the parable is told to him from his mother. You know what? If you bear with me 1 second here, I should be able to find it very quickly. All right, you can probably all see my screen still. If we go to, this is a great tool in case you do not know Sefaria.org. It's a great tool. Has basically all of Torah literature, or much of Torah literature online.
And this is a great tutorial on how to use it right here.
There you go. Although I'm not speaking out what I'm doing, but I've now brought us to Proverbs 31, which is the last chapter of Proverbs. And it says over here, these are the words of Lemuel, the king, a parable for which he was reprimanded by his mother. And then it continues. And then in verse 10 it begins the famous poem. It's a acrostic. It's in the order of the alphabet of Eshet Chayil. So if Lemuel in this case would be King Solomon, it's another name that he uses according to our tradition. I could just double check that too. If you can see what I'm doing, I'm pulling up Rashi. And Rashi tells us, at least this is according to Rashi's understanding, that Lemuel is Divrei Shlomo HaMelech. These are the words of King Solomon that was said in reference to God because he sinned against God. And Rashi continues and says that it was a rebuke that his mother said to him. So anyway, so there you go. We're back to Kohelet. But I hope that's helpful.
That was great, thanks.
Okay. So again, we have over here King Solomon telling us that there is what to be found, but whatever we're translating as Isha, as the woman, whether it's his own personal life experience or whether it's as the sages understand it, it's this reference to minut, to heresy. He did not find wisdom over there. An interesting thing, this caught my eye, is that there is a statement from the sages that they say amongst the wise you only find 1 out of 1,000, and they kind of come with an interesting calculation. They say, well, 1 out of 10 or whatever, 100 out of every 1,000 people are successful in school, and those who are successful in school, that 100, only about 10 of them make it to higher levels of the school. And at the end of the day, only 1 out of 10 of those, so one person, is really fit to be a leader, or to really guide people and lead them in the ways of Torah. So that's your 1 out of 1,000, which is kind of a funny little calculation. I just kind of caught my eye and I wanted to share it, but it doesn't directly connect with our rendering of the verses over here. I just thought that was interesting. Okay, so again, that's verse number 28. Let me read the verse one more time because it's a funny verse. Asher od biksha nafshi, because my soul looked into it. V'lo matzati, I did not find anything. Adam echad me'elef matzati, 1 out of 1,000 people I did find. V'isha v'chol ela lo matzati, but a woman amongst all these I did not find. Okay, and that takes us to the last verse in the chapter. So this is verse number 29 chapter 7, verse number 29. And he says like this: Levad, only re'ezem matzati. Look at this that I have found. Now he's used that phrase before. He used it just a couple verses ago. Re'ezem matzati. Look what I have found. Asher asa ha'elokim et ha'adam yashar. God makes a person straightforward. Vehema vikshu chishbonot rabim, and they search out for themselves many calculations. Okay, let's read that one more time. Levad, only re'ezeh matzati, see what I have found. Asher asa ha'elokim et adam yashar, that God makes a person straightforward. Vehema vikshu chishbonot rabim, and they search out for themselves many calculations, or actually great calculations. So if we're being honest, it's not cheshbonot rabot, it's cheshbonot rabim, meaning that the cheshbon, the calculations themselves are great, are large. Not that there are many of them. That word rabim could have two meanings. It could be many or it could be large. Here, if I'm correct, I believe it would have to mean that they are large calculations. So what do we have over here? King Solomon is telling us that now you want to know what I have found? This is what I have found. And he's laying down a basic piece of knowledge, piece of wisdom for us to understand. This, I think, is we kind of look at this. This is our base level, a foundation that you can start to understand. You could lay a lot of other wisdom on top of. And that is that people in their greatest state, I would say, are yashar, they're straightforward. And it's only because of us and our brains that we start to get more complicated. So the idea here would seem to be that King Solomon is telling us that where do you find wisdom more than anywhere else? You find wisdom in a certain level of simplicity. The nature of a person is to be simple, not simple as in stupid, not simple as in lacking understanding, lacking knowledge, but simple in the fact that a person by their nature will find what should turn towards the simple, should make their lives and everything around them simple. And it's only because of we for some reason desire to make things more complicated. It's a mistake that we make, that we overcomplicate things, in other words. The term yashar means straight, which means not veering right or veering left. It means just going straight. You know, as anybody who's tried to ask for directions in Israel, you know that Israelis have a way of giving directions. They say you go yashar, 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 you go straight, 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 and then once you're there, you ask. Then ask over there. You know, it's a bane of Americans trying to get directions in Israel, is that Israelis hate giving directions. But the term yashar again means that you just go straight. And what I'm understanding over here is that there's a simplicity in the way that God made us. Meaning, whenever we're referring to the fact that God made us, that means that the perfect human, so to speak, you know, as God, made by God himself, so to speak, would be somebody who is just simple. Again, not simple as in lack of knowledge, but simple as in they don't complicate things. And where do complications come from? Complications come from a number of factors. These are all mentioned over here. Number one is Hema. Until this point, this verse said that God created the man meaning, or the person. Adam is not specifically gendered as man, but God creates the person straightforward, and then there's a plural. So that's a singular. Then there's a plural. V'hema, and they, bikshu, search out, in the plural again, that u at the end of the word means that they, that's a plural. So they search out these great calculations. So I think there's a number of ideas that he's throwing out over here. Number one is there's one thing that keeps us, that overcomplicates things, and that is input from other people. When you start to get input from other people and you start to listen to all the different opinions and all the different ideas that are out there, that's when things start to get a little more complicated. If you were to just close off from everything else you hear and just think in your own head about what you think about something, that would be yashar. That would be straightforward. But v'hema, once we include other people in our thought process, that can create certain levels of confusion. Now, we've already discussed, it's very important to get other ideas, and that you have to be have your brain open, at least to a certain degree, to know what's going on and to think through things and get new concepts into your mind. But there's no question that that's when complication begins. So in other words, he's not downplaying complication as a bad thing. He's just saying that it's not natural as a state for a person, I guess is kind of how I look at it. The natural state of a person is more in simplicity, but once we get other people, other chatter in our heads, that's when it starts to get more complicated. The other thing is that there's this bikush, there's this desire, this need for complication. We as humans, we have this need to complicate things. We don't feel content and happy with the simplicity. And so therefore we end up going into or overcomplicating things that are relatively or should be simple. So I think those are two factors that he's identifying over here. There's a hema, there's the complication that's brought about by multitude of voices, by static. Then there's also the bikush, the desire that we have, the need we have to complicate things. We don't feel settled sometimes if an idea is too simple. So the sages over here have an interesting statement that they say. It kind of builds off that last verse, that if you understand it as this story of a man trying to find wisdom, and he's being held back by his partner, his life partner. So it ties in kind of well with the Adam and Eve story, where Adam was fine, so to speak, until Eve comes up and gives him this static. She throws in this idea of, oh, well, maybe we should eat the apple, or not apple, but the fruit of the tree. So I don't think we're necessarily tacking all the blame onto Eve necessarily. But I think what the sages are identifying over here is that ends up being a certain level, that ends up creating a certain level of confusion. I guess what I would want to say from this is that if you want to find wisdom, so we have a lot of input. We've got a lot of things coming at us all the time. We've got all these different voices going on in our head. But if we want to find wisdom, then what we have to do is figure out what we think in our own heads. Kind of shut off all the other voices going on for a second and think to yourself, what do I think about something? That's a very hard thing to do, especially nowadays we're bombarded constantly with information, with ideas, with this guy's wrong or that person's right, or vote for this person, they're all buy Coca-Cola, right? So when we go with all that's static going on in our brains, that's where we start to lose our access to wisdom. We lose our ability to have wisdom. But when we sit down and we kind of clear everything else out, clear out all the other voices, then we can start to understand, oh, this is what I actually think. Same thing also with bikshu, with this bikush, this desire that people have to complicate things. If we figure out and we identify where those things are, where does that desire come from? Why are we complicating things? Then it makes it a lot easier for a person to find straightforwardness, to find simplicity. And simplicity, again, is the goal if we're looking to then build and create wisdom through that. When we have these two factors, it creates something, it creates a cheshbon, a calculation that is much larger, cheshbonot rabim, large calculations. It takes something that should be simple and make something much bigger, much larger, much more complicated, overcomplicates things. And that, when you have that, you start to move away from godliness. Godliness is yashar, is when God creates the person straightforward, simple. When we are doing these things, when we're listening to static and we are not identifying where our desires are, so that overcomplicates things, okay? So that seems to be the idea behind this verse 29, and that is the end of the 7th chapter. I believe that this verse number 29, is beginning the next thought. We've had that before, where the last verse of the chapter, it really is beginning the next idea, the next thought. I think that's what's happening over here. So without any further ado, let's at least start the 8th chapter. I don't know if we're going to get through the whole verse tonight, but we'll at least get started. All right, so again, this is now chapter 8, verse 1. And it says like this. Mi kehechafam. Who is like the wise person? Umi yodea pesher davar. And who knows how to clarify things or to make things work, make ideas work. Chachmat adam ta'ir panav. The wisdom of a person enlightens their face. Va'oz panav yeshunah. Well, that's a little harder to translate, but the understanding at least seems to be that the strength of their face is different. Okay, let's translate it like that. We're going to see that it's not so simple to translate those words, but let's go with that. The strength, the force of their face is different. So let's read that all one more time. Mi kehechacham, who is like the wise person? Umi yodea pesher davar, who knows how to rectify things, how to make things work. Chachmat adam ta'ir panav, the wisdom of a person enlightens their face. Va'oz panav yeshuneh, and changes the strength of their face. Okay, so now he's giving us an idea of what is a wise person. Okay, we just said that one of the natures, one of the facets of wisdom, one of the main foundations of wisdom is that wisdom finds its home in simplicity. Okay, that's where you're going to find wisdom, at least starting. All right, we build from simplicity upwards. So he says, let's look at the wise person themselves. And he just says, Mi kehacham, who is like a wise person? Meaning we're about to give you an understanding of what it is that a wise person looks like. And he tells us 3 traits of the chacham, of the wise person. Right? The first one is mi yodea pesher davar. Now, there is a vav there that connects the words. I believe that's a prosaic. He's just making it kind of more poetic. He's like, who is like the wise person, and who can make things click. But I think what he means to say is really, there's almost like a colon over here. Who is like a wise person? They have these following 3 traits. And that's not my own take. That's a lot of the commentaries say that. Umi is the beginning of the answer to the question of who is like the wise person. So let's see what it is. So the first thing that he tells us is that a wise person is somebody who knows how to pesher davar. So pesher is an interesting word. You'll find that it's used in a number of different contexts. For example, in one context, we understand that the word pashar means lukewarm. Okay, lukewarm water, pushrin, or lukewarm water. But really, the idea of peshar is that it's something that connects two things. So, like lukewarm water is half hot water and half cold water that's just mixed together. Now it's room temperature. So pesher davar means the ability to synthesize, to bring ideas together, and to contrast opposite ideas, and to maintain simplicity throughout the entire process. A real wise person is not somebody who could throw a bajillion words at you, use the most eloquent locution, anything like that. That doesn't show that a person's wise. That shows that a person owns a thesaurus, right? It doesn't show that a person actually contains wisdom. Perhaps it shows that they contain some sort of knowledge, but it does not say anything about their wisdom. A wise person is able to take concepts and make them simple, and make them understandable, make them achievable, and something that anybody accessible to everybody. Okay, that's what a chacham is. Somebody who could take concepts, take a davar, take an idea, and apply pesher, to apply synthesis throughout it, to take things and bring them together and make them work. Okay, that's the first idea of a wise person. We used to say in yeshiva that if you don't know how to explain something, you don't fully understand it. Okay, which is it's not just in yeshiva. That's where I know it from. But it's a concept in general that You can have somebody who seems to have a great argument going on, but they can't actually communicate what it is they're trying to say. Then that means that they're lacking in a full understanding of it. They're not holding in a level of chacham, of a wise person. Okay, so that's the first trait of a wise person. The second trait is chachmat adam ta'ir panav, that the wisdom of the wise person lightens up their face. And I think this just means that their wisdom shows itself in the actions that the person does. It shows himself in their approach to life. A true chacham, a true wise person, will approach life happier. Okay, you can have brains, you can have the ability to think and to know and all those sorts of things, but that itself can tear a person's life apart. It can make a person less happy. But a real chacham figures out how to use their chachma, how to use their wisdom, and to turn it into something that makes their life better. Okay, it brightens up their own face. They are wise, and you can see it in the happiness that's on their face. It's almost like they're happy despite the fact that they're wise. It's kind of one way to look at it. And the third thing is, va'oz panav yeshuneh, it changes the strength or the forcefulness of their face. Now, we had oz before a couple of verses ago, in the middle of the last chapter, and it also means arrogance. So it means strength and it means arrogance. And yeshuneh over here means to change. All right, that's a common root word over there that we have in a lot of places. Yeshuneh means to change. So what it means is that it changes their face from arrogance. It moves them away from arrogance. A true wise person does not become arrogant in their wisdom. They figure out a way to keep it inside and to know when to apply in the right places so they do not come off as arrogant. The sages put out an interesting idea over here. They say that you could almost read this verse as ve'iz panav yisuna, instead of yeshuna. That shin can be read as a sin, meaning that a person who is an arrogant person, someone who has arrogance on their face, you can hate that person. Meaning a wise person does not delve into arrogance. He stays away from that entirely, because that's not what their wisdom is there to do. Their wisdom is not there to lord over other people. Their wisdom is there to share and to make better with other people, as we saw in the last piece. It's there to bring happiness. It's there to bring people themselves, everybody else around them, to a better situation. So number one is a wise person knows how to synthesize, how to make things understandable. The second thing is that it improves their own lives. And the third thing is that it improves the lives of those around them, really. It doesn't allow them to become arrogant, become conceited and full of themselves. Rather, it's there to help other people. Okay? So these are three things that he identifies as traits of the wise person. Okay, we are at the end of the time, so let me go to the regular screen here. Okay, thank you all for coming. It's good to see some faces we haven't seen in a while.